So last spring, I swapped the camshaft on my 1991 Volvo 240, and while I was doing that, I was shooting video on sort of how to do the cam swap. And I shot most of the video, and I just kind of forgot about it. And recently, I rediscovered the video in my media folder. So I decided I put together what I shot, which is about 80% of the cam swap, and put it up in case anyone wanted to see how that worked. So this is good for a beginner who's never done this sort of thing on a Volvo before. It's a gives you a good look at the engine with the valve cover off and how the camshaft attaches and what you have to measure and what you have to take apart. So I hope someone finds this useful. Towards the end of the project, I didn't record putting the camshaft back together and how to order the shims, and we'll talk a little bit about that at that point. But hopefully someone finds this useful. Okay, since I swapped the automatic transmission in my 91 Volvo 240 to a manual, I'm also going to do a cam swap. I'm going to change out the stock M cam, which is basically a cam that's not meant to rev very high. In fact, if you've ever revved out one of these red blocks with an M cam, they don't really like revving too much above 3,000, 3,500 with a B cam, which is supposed to rev better. So we're going to go through and we're going to change out that cam. I'm going to kind of just go through the steps and try to record as I go along. First thing I'm going to do is take off that valve cover and take off this front timing belt cover, and then we're going to set the engine at top dead center. So let's do that first. Okay, now we're going to now that the valve cover is off and the top of the timing belt covers off, we're going to set the timing to top dead center. So this is important because you need to match up. This is what matches up the engine from the valves to the crankcase down there, and this belt is what connects the two. And we want to make sure that when we put this thing back together after we put the new cam in, the timing is set, or else it won't run. Luckily, it won't break anything. We'll just have to redo it, but it won't run. So we're going to put the long block, the pistons down here on top dead center. We're going to make sure that the valves are on top dead center. These two valves should be pointed up, and then we could start to take the belt off and then take the cam off. To move, we're just going to turn the entire engine with a 24 millimeter ratchet, and we're gonna line up our timing marks. So we have a couple timing marks we need to line up. We need this one here. You can see the mark on the plastic cover, and over down there is the mark on the gear. So we're going to rotate this until it's lined up with that dot. Those two dots should match, and then all the way down the crank pulley, I'm going to turn it so the timing mark lines up with the 0 there. Now, some people say don't trust that timing mark on the crank pulley because it can move, because it's like a two-piece pulley, and sometimes it could slip. But I've done this a few times on this car, and I know that pulley, if I set that at the top dead center, that's good. So we're going to rotate the engine clockwise until everything's on top dead center, and then we could take off this timing belt. And the important part here is that down here on the crank pulley, this is what turns the pistons. This needs to stay at top dead center the entire time we do this job. We could always adjust the valves on the intermediate shaft while we're putting everything back together to make sure that lines up. But that we need to keep in the right spot. Okay, now the timing marks are lined up. We're at top dead center. The timing marks lined up down there too. It's actually, you can see it kind of lined up to the 0. You can see the 0 on the timing mark. It doesn't look perfectly lined up, but this is top dead center. So now we're going to take off the belt, and before we do that, we're going to break this bolt off on the top gear. Then we'll loosen this belt by. I'll show you how we're going to do that. We're going to loosen this bolt, take a lever of some kind, a big screwdriver or a pry bar, pull this back, that will loosen the belt, and then tighten it, that will keep the belt loose, and then we should be able to pop this off, and then take this gear off, and then start to take the cam out. Okay, so the belt is off. This bolt has been broken, so it could, because it's easier to do that when the belt's on, or you can use an impact tool. But either way, that's loosened now. I haven't taken it off. And now we're going to start removing these brackets that hold in the camshaft. Now, remember, this camshaft is being pushed up on by the engine valve springs. So you don't want to just take them off all in a row. You want to kind of loosen them so this whole thing comes up evenly. Because, you know, this is a cast iron camshaft and it's more fragile than you might think. It's more brittle than you might think. So, you know, loosen these carefully. Don't just loosen one side and not the other. So go around, take your time loosening them in like a star pattern. And then you should be able to take the camshaft out after you remove this gear, which it is attached to. So, all right, let's go ahead and do that. Nope. Okay, the camshaft's out. So if we look down the engine, we could see these little buckets. And what those little silver discs are on top are the shims to adjust the clearance between the camshaft and the valve. So those little buckets push down, those little shims sit on top of little buckets which push down the springs and open and close the valves. So what we have to do is we have to take out each one of these little buckets, take out the shim, measure it, write it down. So we have 8 of them to do. It's not too hard. They're not in there, you don't have to unbolt anything. They just kind of lift out. You're gonna need like a set of dental picks. And it's probably a good idea to clean up this oil so not too much of it falls down onto your valves. That's gonna burn off when you turn on the car, I guess. But all right, let's go ahead and clean this up and then we'll start taking out these shims and measuring them. Now, when we swap out the cam, we also want to measure the valve clearance. So the valves, the valve clearance. So the cams push down on these tappets, and that which open the valves. And these tappets, once you have the cam out, you could pull them up. I'm just going to take my pick, and I could pull this tappet completely out, like that. Now the tappet's out. On top of the tappet here is a shim. And what we want to do is we're going to take this shim out, measure it with a micrometer, and then write down the measurements. We're going to do that for all 8 shims. Make sure you put them back in the same place and you write it down so you know how thick each shim is. Okay, as we take a look underneath the tappets, you'll see the valve spring there. And that little black ring is actually a little shock absorber that's supposed to quiet down the valve train. On most older Volvos, these have completely worn away and have turned brittle. So while you're in here, you might as well take these out carefully and not drop it down to the engine. And I'm just gonna wait until I could use 2 hands here, but you wanna take this out carefully. And you could replace these and have a little bit quieter engine until they wear out again, or a lot of people just kind of skip this part and never replace them. And I'm going to replace mine. The new pieces are only about 60 cents each. I flipped this one off, but here it is. And you can see how brittle it is. It just will literally crush. This should be rubber, and it's like hard plastic at this point. And also check underneath. You can see there's part of it down there on the inside of the tappet valve. So I finished measuring all of the shims for the valves, and this cheap micrometer from, this is not actually from Harbor Freight, but Harbor Freight style micrometer is not accurate enough. You need at least to the 100th millimeter to measure these shims. So I did need to borrow a better micrometer to do this job, and I wrote them all down. Now we have the new camshaft sitting there. We're going to torque this camshaft down, and then we're going to measure the valve clearance. And if they need adjusting, we'll have to get some new shims. If they're good, we'll put on the hushers and then put all of this back together and be done. Here's where I kind of stopped recording during the project, and I'll give you a quick overview, but you might want to look into this a little bit further if you got into this step in your project. So with the new camshaft in and all the shims measured and written down, what I did was I took a feeler gauge and I would turn each camshaft so the lobe was pointed up, and I'd measure the clearance between the bottom of the camshaft and the shim. Write all the clearances down, and then you could compare them to what the tolerance is. And what my valve clearance was supposed to be was written on a sticker inside my engine compartment. So that's how I got the numbers that I was shooting for. Once I know what the clearance is and what the shim thickness is, I can then just do a little subtraction and figure out if I needed a new shim, what I had to order. Now, most of my shims did need to be replaced. So I ordered those shims. I had to wait for them to come in. I ordered them from like IPD. I think had the best variety of shims. I waited for those to come in, and then I took the camshaft off again, put in the new shims, torqued everything back down, set the engine to top dead center, and put it back together.